Are you ready to spring into action in your garden, but the weather isn't cooperating? On this episode of Garden Time, we talk about a few of the late winter chores you can tackle before the spring arrives. We also talk about what you should avoid doing right now. All coming up next on Garden Time. Garden Time is brought to you by Capital Subaru in Salem, Oregon.
Here at Capital Subaru, we are family. From you, our customers, our coworkers, and even our actual family members work here. This is my son, Casey. We're generations ahead of the competition, and we're always working to keep you and your family moving.
We're here for you. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
All the support you need, from sales and financing to service and parts. We'll be here for you for generations to come.
And generations after that.
I'm Blake.
And I'm Casey. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
Where it's
your way on the Parkway.
Welcome to the Garden Time Podcast. We're based in the Pacific Northwest of the United States in a Zone 8 region. This zone deals with plants that can survive in 10 degrees Fahrenheit or warmer. I'm producer Jeff Gustin with your hosts Judy Alaruzzo and Ryan Seeley. And welcome to Garden Time. We are back again with Jan McNeilan, retired OSU Extension agent from Oregon State University. And Jan used to do a monthly tips with us on our regular TV show. Now, since we're doing the podcast, we are only going to do this kind of on a quarterly system. And the last time you were here, you had so much information. It was literally a book.
Well, I figured you guys...
People were asking, how can I get this book?
Yeah.
You can't.
Yeah. No, it really was. We never finished the end part. We're supposed to have what to do in the garden this particular month. And we never... I never finished the landscape design piece of it. So it sits there, and now I get to use it a little more.
Excellent.
You have to listen to our podcast to get
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the OSU, Oregon State University Extension Service, has a wonderful library of information.
Yeah.
You can go there. They have garden calendars if you don't know what to do. Here in the Pacific Northwest, specifically Western Oregon, Eastern Oregon, they have a list of things you can do every month. And so we're going to talk about some of the things you can do in late winter, early spring going into it. And I see our old friend pruning is at the very, very top again. So what are the tips for pruning? Because I know for roses, President's Day here in the Pacific Northwest is kind of the unwritten rule to go back and do your spring pruning. And that could be pretty harsh pruning too. It's not cutting it off down to your waist or your knees. Now you're supposed to really give them a good one.
Right. Well, you can. I mean, it's not. People need a reminder being President's Day. It's time to do my roses. But you could do it now, and it's supposed to be really cold, and it might force some new growth. And then when the weather warms up and the new growth died because it's cold, you just prune it a little more. And so, or you wait and you think, I'm never getting to it, it's April, and what am I? You can still prune them. You're just going to have flowers later in the year. So there's hard and fast rules, sorta. So if put it on your calendar that from here on I'm going to prune the roses. So, and there's lots of good information on rose pruning.
And we have so many segments from Garden Time.
Absolutely.
All those links and things
Yeah.
in the archives. So.
But it is kind of important to remember that, whenever you're pruning, it's an estimate, right? I mean, it's not a hard, fast rule that you have to do it here.
It's
You
not.
got to kind of adjust, depending on your weather and what's
Right.
in the forecast.
And you can do your grapes now or in January or March or early April. And same thing, you're just going to get later fruit. And people really worry about grapevines squirting out water out of where you cut it. And folks are like, do I put a tourniquet on it? And instead, it's just that those vines are starting to come alive, and you're pruning them later than you would in January or February, and they're just pumping water out of the ground. So it's not going to hurt.
I remember we tried to do a story with Bernadine Strick, OSU researcher, on pruning blueberries. And our TV season always started at the beginning of March. And she already had everything already pruned for blueberries in February. And so for her, that was kind of the time that she did it at the research station.
Right.
But for the home gardener, I mean, you can do it even when they have berries on them, but it's not really the
Right.
optimum,
Right.
or optimal time.
Right.
And with blueberries, what are you looking for to prune? Because they don't take a lot of pruning, but what do you look for to if you wanted to?
Normally, it's a third, a third, a third, and so you take a third of the old stuff out. Because blueberries bloom and fruit on new growth. So you're wanting there to be healthier, newer growth. So you take a third of the older canes out, and next year you take a third of the older canes out, and that's all you need to do. So you leave, except for diseased or broken branches or whatever, but you're leaving about 2/3 of the plant.
And the older ones, they look old. I mean,
They do,
compared to the
they're
new
kind of
growth.
shaggy
Yeah,
and brown
right.
compared to green.
Yes, yes. So what about other plants and like apples and that kind of stuff?
Well, when they're dormant, how much pruning have you done, winter pruning?
Winter pruning, I'm doing some perennial stuff, just clean up from
Yeah.
through my yard.
Yeah.
But I haven't done too much. But it's for me, it's a lot of weather dependent,
Sure.
right? Because it's we have long stretches where it's rainy and dreary and cold
Yeah.
for
Not
months
out
on end,
there.
and I'm not going to go out
No.
and prune
Right.
just because the
It
calendar
says
says it might to.
Right.
Absolutely.
But we'll get a nice week. Like we have some really nice weather right now, where we have some sunshine. We got cold temperatures at night.
25 and sunny.
Right, right. So you kind of balance that out, and then for me, it's always kind of my yard debris can is filled from
Right,
pruning or not yet.
Right. So you can prune, pretty soon some of the spring blooming plants are going to start, the camellias and the other spring bloomers. And so you can prune, or you should actually prune, spring blooming plants after they bloom, because they set the new buds for the following year. So if you wait a long time, you're not going to get as much set, and it also helps you clean up the debris from, especially the larger camellias.
And I know you told us before you get calls when you were working for Extension, when people call say, I didn't get any blooms this year. And it's like,
Right.
well, when did you prune?
Yes.
You pruned too late,
Yeah.
and you pruned off essentially all your blooms for that year.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
Is that pretty true going throughout, even like in summertime? You get some things, like spireas or some of the viburnums that are the later bloomers. Typically want to prune after something is done blooming.
I think the rule of thumb is spring blooming plants you prune after
After
they've,
they're
yeah.
done
And
blooming.
others, depending on how long it's going to be before winter, I think I'd be more careful about that. Like rhodies, and azaleas, you need to prune them after they've flowered, because they'll also set their buds.
Right.
Yeah. Forsythia, probably.
Yeah, because it's a spring
Right.
bloomer. Yeah.
Lilacs. So all those
Yeah.
kind of things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I know a lot of it, you mentioned the nice weather, Ryan. A lot of people are getting out and they want to clean up their garden. Is it too early?
To clean up, no, except to rake off your mulch, yes. You still want to have some root protection when it's still cold, and then later on you can rake that off. But as far as cleanup, right now, my backyard is really filled with fir branches. And so, but all the neighbors around, they're fairly new to the neighborhood. They all just went right out after that windstorm and they cleaned it all up, and I didn't, because it's going to happen again, and then I'd have to do it twice.
Right.
A smart woman.
So are we wanting to wait until after we're past all of those hard freeze dates, or just kind of watch the calendar before we?
Well,
Because some things in my yard are already starting to emerge.
Sure,
To
sure.
come up,
Well-
hellebores are blooming. And,
Right.
Right.
Well, I do have, that's a good point, because I do have the pots on the south side of the garage that have got leaves over the top of them, but the daffodils are coming through. A lot of different bulbs in pots. So pretty soon I need to do that, because the leaves are going to make all those leaves yellow instead of green.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that
You
brings
need
up
the
a point
sunshine,
about bulbs too, because Judy gets this at Al's. People come in, their bulbs are starting to show up, and we just had super cold weather. They're saying that we could have some more cold weather on the way. People start getting a little anxious when they start
Sure.
seeing the bulbs starting to pop. It's not a problem, is it?
Not really, because I've seen daffodils in full bloom in ice. I mean, and then it melts and they're still there.
It seems like my crocus are usually
Oh, yeah.
bloom more in the snow
Snowdrops.
than they do in the.
Right, I do have snowdrops out
I do
right
too.
now.
They're so pretty.
They really
got
are.
them.
But no, what you're seeing first are not the flower buds. You're seeing the leaves, and they come up first. And I've rarely, if ever, seen any daffodil shoots coming up, no matter what the snow, ice, or what. That's why they start to grow in this time of year, because they can tolerate the cold.
Mother Nature's got a pretty good instinct about
Much
when
better
it's
than
supposed
we
to
do.
start
Yeah.
emerging and,
Exactly.
and judging it probably more so than we do.
Yeah.
Well, I know that our pots are not as hardy as the bulbs are, because the bulbs are coming up and our pots are starting to crack from the freeze.
Oh,
that we got.
correct, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that just tells me that we didn't have good enough drainage. There
Yeah.
was water in the pot,
Yeah.
and it actually forced it, and it's starting to break. So,
Mm.
weeds. Is it too early to weed? When we talk about February, I know as we get into March and that kind of thing, we talk about weeds and trying to get them before they go to seed. And I already noticed that we're getting weeds that are
Yeah.
flowering.
It's never too early to weed.
We were hoping you'd say something else.
Sure, because the more it goes to seed, the more weeds you're going to have. So actually a good time to weed is in the fall, when before winter and spring happen, then you're removing the potential of them starting to pop and flower.
We'll probably notice, as you're talking about the mulch that you've left in your beds over winter, to help insulate those plants. As you start to things emerge and start to remove that, that's when you're going to find
Yeah.
a lot of weeds that have been harboring over the winters in there.
Right.
Bug, aphids,
Yeah.
things like that. That
But
have kind
you've
of nested in.
also, the flip side of that is that you've also provided protection for all the beneficial
Right.
insects. So it's not that you're going to have any more slugs because you have leaves on the bed. You're really not. So
The benefits are better.
yeah, and there again in the fall, if you bait for slugs in the fall, you have a lot less slug problem in the spring, because those little guys can lay as many as 100 eggs each.
Yeah.
So,
And baiting for slugs, is that something we should be looking at now as we're cleaning out our beds?
if there's showing damage, yes, but I would wait a little bit, because they're not going to be out. The time to bait is in the fall when there's so many eggs, but I would just do it when you see damage. Oh, and you will when the hostas start to pop
yeah.
and
Right.
all the tender plants do.
You're bringing up a whole thing about temperature here. And it's really still a little cold for a lot of things, even in the garden to start up.
Yeah.
I mean, slugs to hatch and that kind of thing.
Right.
So as people pull weeds, they could be dispersing weed seeds, but the weed seeds won't necessarily germinate until
Till
it
it gets
warms
warmer.
up a little
Yeah.
bit. And so, and that's true with everything. Is that, I mean.
Well, because like every seed packet you have, it tells you what temperature they'll germinate at.
I remember you had the temperature written
I
down
write
on your
it on the
seed
package,
packets.
so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't seed it too soon.
Yeah.
Once I know what the soil, which we have talked about every year for all these years,
Yes.
that soil temperature is important.
And that's so fascinating, and I think you've taught us that, because you don't think about it. You think, oh, the air temperature, it's warm, that
Like,
the
it's beautiful
soil.
out, but it's 25.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right, exactly, because
Yeah.
you just don't think about it. And you have
Yeah.
that great thermometer to show us. And
Yeah.
So, since you're talking about we were talking about weed seed, a lot of people use pre-emergence. Is that, I tend to stay away from that, because yes, it stops the weed seeds from germinating, but it also, I think, stops a lot of the other things in the garden from doing their thing.
The labels on pre-emergence are really big, because there's a lot of lists of what it'll work on, what it won't work on, what to use it on, what not to. So really the best advice is thoroughly read those labels, and when you switch from an ornamental bed to a garden bed, make sure you know that now that I'm going to do this bed, does this work for that?
Right.
True.
Yeah.
Because you can damage a lot of emerging
Sure.
perennials that are starting to come up when you're using the pre-emergence
Sure.
creates that kind of that gaseous layer
Yeah.
right under the soil.
Yeah.
So anything trying to pop up through that,
Yeah.
including perennials, may
Sure.
be
Yeah.
damaged.
I think sometimes you want such a quick fix, and it's like, yeah, we got to weed.
Yeah, and I
know?
think people, they don't want to weed. And it's like
Yeah.
going, I only want to pull these once.
Right.
Sorry, nature's way ahead of you
Yeah,
on this
right.
one. So,
Yeah. Look at it as a therapy. You're out in your garden.
Yes.
And it's just a mindless kind of thing, and you get to relax and be
Sure.
outside. It's like I love weeding though for that.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
it's my
and there's
quiet
a-
time.
There's a difference too. You can see what you've
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
It
yeah.
looks
Yes.
really-
It
Because
is.
I was out last weekend because we had a nice, one of those early breaks in the weather, and so doing some weeding and select pruning. But I haven't got into I mowed my lawn.
Whoa.
I'm like, it's sunny out, and I'm like,
Yeah.
should I be doing that? Should
Yeah.
I not? It's a little rangy from
Oh, it's not.
winter time, but I'm like, I don't think it's
Why
going to do
not?
any harm.
Yeah, the only time I don't is because I have a high water table in the backyard, and when I use my tractor, I have all these tire marks in the mud in the lawn.
That's not good.
But using a regular
Yeah.
mower and mow it, and it just looks so nice and
Yeah.
smells
Right.
good. So.
It made me aware of how much moss I have in my in my lawn now.
Another to do.
This is the time of year. Yeah.
and I actually, for those listening, I'm wearing my OSU turf grass shirt that we got from Alex down at Oregon State University when we did the story on turf grass. And he was mentioning that there are certain things you can do in the winter, mowing and that kind of stuff. But once again, it's a temperature thing in
Yeah.
that applying fertilizers, they could just be washing away
It's
because
just-
the plants are not ready. Grass plants too, or
Yeah.
like any other plant, it just could be too cold for
Yeah.
them. So,
Well, when you're seeding, doing some repair or whatever on the lawn, the dates that I always learn from OSU is from April 15th to October 15th. So anything before April 15th, in other words, that grass is really not going to grow that much.
right.
And after October 15th, it's going to be too cold.
right. And the same that you would mention moss and a lot of the moss control. I know this isn't a huge thing around the country. In fact, we were talking with a sales representative, and he said the two big moss areas are the Northeast, up in like Maine, and the Pacific Northwest,
Sure.
just because of the conditions we
Yeah.
have. And applying that product, once again, could be too early because
Sure.
of the temperature.
Sure,
It won't work.
sure.
And we're all busy. I mean, and to do something and then have to do it again. And the chemicals are not
Right.
cheap.
No.
So
Yeah.
it makes sense to
Yeah.
look at it and make sure you read it. I mean,
Yeah.
we try to tell people that all the time, to read the instructions, because there was a lot of money, all that research.
Right.
So,
So what else do we
So-
have on
Yeah, so we've done a lot of cleanup.
Yeah.
So what we're starting to see, the garden centers are waking up. Things are flowering, and they'll kind of get the bug to want to get out and maybe plant some things. So what about planting this time of year?
Depends on what it is. We were talking about seeds, and those have their own constraints. But this time of year, even though it's cold, anything that's an outdoor ornamental will be fine. You don't mulch your trees in the winter; they make it fine. But any kind of planting you do now is fine because it gets them a nice start for spring. They may just sit there after you plant them, but when the soil starts to warm up, they will too, and then they're get established a little sooner.
Because we're starting to see, a lot in the garden centers now, a lot of bare root items, and maybe talk a little bit about bare root items and versus potted and what it, special treatment and maybe what it takes to plant a bare root, and that is the time of year to be doing it.
Sure, a bare root is a deciduous plant that loses its leaves, and so bare root is ready to plant because it is not leafing out yet. And so the colder the soil is, it's fine because it'll get that head start. Now, balled and burlap may also be the same idea, but if you start seeing, if it's not in a pot, if you start seeing trees that are bare root leafing out, the sooner you get them in the ground, the better it'll be.
Yeah, because there's no
No.
pot of soil that's
No,
holding
there's
those roots.
nothing to
They're-
hold the
They're
moisture.
typically wrapped in
Right.
some sort of
Right.
like a peat product or bark or shavings
Yeah.
or something and
Yeah.
wrapped in plastic.
Or
just to
not
get
at
it-
all. You just pull it
Yeah.
out of the sawdust and
Yeah,
go pay
sounds
for
good.
it.
Right.
Take it
And,
to plant.
you mentioned balled and burlap, and for those people that are listening and watching, it's when they essentially dig the plant with its entire root system already in the soil from the farm, and then they just put burlap around
Right.
it and then tie it off. It's funny is that you go into the garden centers now and you start to see bare root roses, but you also see potted roses, which were bare root roses 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the employees have just put them in
Right.
pots for you
Yeah.
to help them root out a little bit
Right.
more. So,
Right.
Judy, what else are you guys seeing at the garden center right now for planting?
So all the fruit trees. So if you're looking for fruit trees, it's the best selection, because if you wait too long,
Yeah.
in March we start potting them all up. It's like all those good varieties that you want or the newer varieties, they're gone,
Yeah.
and you have to wait a whole nother year. So, but we have a really good selection, and I think so many of the independents do. Strawberries, we're expecting those, and you get the bundles of those. Bundles of onions will start coming in, asparagus roots. So, potatoes will start coming in a little bit later, probably late March or so. So all that stuff is coming. So that's what's so exciting about it, is you get first crack of it.
And you're still seeing some late winter, early spring ornamentals too that are
Sure.
in the garden centers that can be planted right now.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's a great time. We always tell people, go at different seasons to see what's blooming, or look in your neighborhood, and so that you have those things in your garden, so you have a 4-season garden.
Right.
And so that's really kind of fun to see what's blooming in this middle to end of winter.
And there's surprisingly a lot of color
Definitely, yeah.
right now with the pansies and the primrose and the hellebores and some of these early blooming perennials that are naturally coming up with their color now.
Yeah.
It's time to be out and
Oh,
freshen
yeah.
up your pots or little areas. in your garden.
Witch hazel are looking really great now. So
There on your list here, you have tune-up, sharpening, that kind of stuff. So a lot of people that didn't get that done in the fall, now's a good time to get out there and
Yeah.
do that. And
Yeah.
Because I know everybody's starting to itch to get out. So,
Sure.
What kind of specifics could you give?
Well,
for-
sharpening your hand pruners and your loppers and things like that, and knowing how to do it right, or having somebody that knows how to do it right. I just have a grinder in the garage. and
nice. Yeah.
Lucky you.
Yeah, I'll bring my tools
come
out.
Let's have a sharper party.
yes, yes. So that I'm really guilty of sometimes leaving a shovel where it's a little moist.
Yeah.
So sometimes just cleaning that up and sharpening that shovel is going to make your digging for planting in the spring a lot easier, especially with our clay soils that are, resistant to dig.
I see on the list moles and gophers. Are they starting to get active, or is it still too early?
Oh, I've got a few that are still moles. And there's a difference between moles and gophers. The gophers are more herbivores, meaning they'll eat your plants and bulbs, and moles are more, I'm looking for the earthworms in the soil,
And the grubs
not for plants.
yeah.
And the mole hill is a volcanic, round volcanic with the exit hole in the top. A gopher hole is shaped like a teardrop, and it goes longer on one side, and the hole where the exit hole is, or entrance, is at the top. So it's narrow at the top and goes into a teardrop, and that's a gopher.
And these are very polarizing animals for a lot of gardeners because, yes, we all know they turn the soil and they circulate nutrients and take organic material down into the soil, but they can really do a number on garden beds. What's your advice to people? I mean,
Tolerate them.
I was going to say, yeah.
For me, I get excited when I see such nice soil.
It is beautiful soil.
Yeah,
It's all
really
worked
is.
up and it's
Yeah,
just.
really, thank
It's
you.
working.
Yeah, I scoop mine up and put it in a pot
Yeah,
and go
me too.
use it
Yeah,
throughout the rest of
me
the garden.
too.
That is smart.
So there was a deal for a while, and I actually hesitate to say it, that if they eat worms, then if you didn't have any worms, you treat your lawn or whatever, so there aren't any worms. And also, if you do that, you're killing off every other insect that's
Yeah,
there,
right.
and it's not the right thing to do at all, because you don't know, if you put it on the lawn, you don't know where they're going to pop up. And so you may be treating a huge lawn for 2 moles that are on one side. So there are, I think the traps are really the most effective. There's all sorts of other home remedies that may sound wonderful, but don't work at all.
Yeah, we've talked to some people that have traps on the market, and they talk about how people try to drive them away. And as long as you have tunnels and you have a food source, they're going to
They're
come
there.
back. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a temporary measure. And a lot of people, you know, they're God's creatures, and we don't
Yeah.
want to do them. And the other ones are like, you know, well, let's send them to see God a little sooner.
Yeah, really. Exactly, exactly. Like the high frequency
Yes.
things.
Yeah.
It's like it just may drive your dog crazy, but it won't hurt the moles.
Yeah.
anyway.
Road flares and all
Yeah,
sorts
right,
of things.
yeah.
Whirligigs.
Well, I do. The best story I ever had, Ray told me once that a friend of his had moles all over his lawn. So he heard that if you just take one of these propane torches and just blow it down the holes, and then he lit it and his whole lawn blew up
Yeah.
from every mole
And-
hole there was.
And I've seen a couple of videos like that.
Yeah,
and
it's just crazy.
you know, and,
So, you know,
and it's a guy in flip-flops throwing a match. And
right,
like,
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, we're talking tool sheds and cleaning up tools. So, I was also out cleaning out my tool shed last weekend because it's, I hadn't been in there in several months since fall. And I noticed there was a good time to do it, but the varmints had gotten in over the winter. So squirrels had gotten in. I had piles of grass seed everywhere and mice eating through bags of things.
Yeah.
And I had to, clean a lot of that out. But then I also realized I have, partial bags of old fertilizers, old chemicals, old sprays that I haven't used in a long time. And I think that's probably pretty common for a lot of people. What do we do with them?
If you're lucky enough to live close, and I know we're talking to a lot of Willamette Valley people, and not Eastern Oregon, et cetera, I don't know what the resources for recycling, but find out where you could take hazardous waste, because that's what it all is. The chemicals, the fertilizers, things that you question, take it anyway, and they'll tell you whether or not. And here in Portland, there's the Metro recycling hazardous waste at all of the larger.
We'll take all of that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to throw it in your garbage can to go into the landfill, because that's
No.
just leaching into
Yeah,
the
for sure, for
ground
sure.
and the waters. But
For sure.
And I know that, across the country, around the world, you can always go to your local garden center, and a lot of times they will have
Recycling.
your local
Yeah.
resources to
Yeah.
to dispose of chemicals safely.
Right.
Because no government wants you to be pouring
No,
that into
not at all.
in the
Not
storm
at
drains
all.
or anything. So,
But it's getting easier to get somewhere to take it than it used to be.
excellent. Well, that was pretty much just the first couple paragraphs here for February. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go a little bit later in winter and earlier into spring and talk about some of the tips for that you can be doing at that time. And we'll be right back after a word from Capital Subaru.
Here at Capital Subaru, we are family. From you, our customers, our coworkers, and even our actual family members work here. This is my son, Casey. We're generations ahead of the competition, and we're always working to keep you and your family moving.
We're here for you. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
All the support you need, from sales and financing to service and parts. We'll be here for you for generations to come.
And generations after that.
I'm Blake,
And I'm Casey. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
where it's
Your way on the Parkway.
Garden Palooza is back. Join us on April 1st at Bauman's Farm and Garden. See over 30 plant growers and garden vendors. There's free parking and free admission. Enter to win a garden arbor and more. Garden Palooza, Saturday, April 1st at Bauman's Farm and Garden in Woodburn.
At Portland Nursery, we believe that gardening is a creative endeavor that enriches our experience, enlivens the spaces around us, and provides a safe haven for the mind. Portland Nursery has everything you need to make your space feel unique, inviting, and exciting. From houseplants and hedges to trees, tools, veggies, and herbs, our selection is always growing and changing, just like you. Come visit us today at 50th and Stark, 90th and Division.
And welcome back to Garden Time. We're talking about late winter, early spring tips with Jan McNeilan, retired Oregon State University Extension agent, back with us again. And we talked a little bit in the first half about seeds and seed planting. And I know Judy has a whole list here of stuff to talk about seeds. So go ahead, Judy.
So, we at the garden center, we have like walls and walls of seeds, and people are so excited. And so they're just picking all of them. And it's like, and I think you get so excited about seeds, but there really is like a list of successful tips to do seeds, and it's timing and how to do it. So what can you give us that will kind of help us with that?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. It's different every year, but I don't have. Some people have a nice windowsill that they can use to get enough light to start seeds. Sometimes you need a grow light. Sometimes it won't work at all. Or one time I did them all in the house, in the kitchen, with light and a heating pad underneath, and I had a full flat. Everything came up great. So I put it out on the deck to water it. I left it overnight and the slugs ate the whole flat. Yeah. So you never know. But I had success with the seed,
yes.
just not with the slugs. So not everybody finds it easy to grow their own seeds. It's a nice challenge.
It is.
But making sure that the timing is right and the light is good and they get enough warmth.
Yeah. So for like, so it's going to be like, say the end of March or so, and maybe we have beds that are ready. So those seeds can go right out. Some of them can go out. It's that hardier type of vegetable that can take that. So which ones would go right into our beds?
Carrots, potatoes, seed potatoes.
Right. You cut them up, yeah.
Yeah. And other cole crops such as broccoli and kale and things like that, you can do direct seeding.
Peas?
Peas, absolutely.
No.
They could do that. You could do peas now.
In February?
Yes.
Okay. And does that matter where in the country? I mean, it's pretty much, they're
when you
pretty
can
hardy.
work the soil, let's
Okay.
put it that way, and it still may be cold, but peas will germinate easily in cold. Let me think.
Lettuces?
Lettuce works fine. You just want to wait for the cucumbers and the squash and the green beans and those things. You want to wait till the soil is much warmer. But look on the package and it will say what the soil temperature is that they will begin to germinate. And if you have a soil thermometer, you'll know if it's time.
Right. And so say the warmer things like that we're going to put out, like our peppers and tomatoes, basil, so we can start those, but maybe wait until the end of March or so to do those?
Yeah, but also some of them take longer than others. So there again, you look at the package and see how long it takes from seed to germination to crop. And so that'll help direct you depending on what it is you're trying to grow.
Yeah, some of that stuff, like you're saying, like the basil,
Yeah.
Basil can't be put outside for, till like June,
Yeah.
late May, June. So
Exactly.
the earlier you start some of that, it may get up ready time, and then what do you do with
they're
it
so
before you can put
Then
it
you
out?
keep pinching it back.
Use it.
But you were mentioning too, we have a package of Renee's seeds here, and their website, depending on where you are in the country, they have specific planting information based on where you are in the country. And there's so much information on the back of the packets.
Absolutely.
There really is, and it's like, and I think even Renee's has recipes on her website,
Some
which
do,
is really
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
But yeah, so much information. It'll tell you where to put them, where to plant it, dates to harvest, because you want to have that kind of ballpark of like, when do I even like start looking to pick it? So I think that it's always a lot of good information on there.
Sure.
Well,
And
Judy, you brought up tomatoes, and I know in the retail setting, the minute that it starts getting nice out, you guys put out tomatoes, but you also have warnings on the tables with the tomatoes, correct?
Yes, and so tomatoes, I mean, think about it. They're a warm season vegetable, and so we want to put them out the end of April, and it's like, no, don't put them out the end of April. But you can get like the little caps for them, the walls of water for them, the row covers, so you have to protect them. Leave them on the deck under cover, but yeah, people just start itching to get out there. But wait for that.
And you, like I said, the signage is there. It says "protect from frost," and people will buy stuff and not protect it, and then they're back again in a month to buy the plants all over again. So.
Yeah. And you learn. I think that that's, it's that excitement for the spring, and you learn after a while.
Sure.
And then also on the packages, there's like a date, like a use-by date, or not a use-by date, but when are they packaged. So do I have to throw these away? I mean, I found in my pantry a bag of seeds that were like, some were 5 or 6 years old. So how do you know which ones to throw away? Or there's some that you can keep year after year.
Right. Well, there's a couple ways. Sometimes people save their own seed, and then you also buy the packets as well. Depends on how the seed was treated, and I don't mean with a chemical. Just was it in light? Was it warm? Was it cold? What was the environment of that package? Or if you've collected your own seed, have you kept it dry? If there's any mold in the seeds, they're gone. So just how it's been kept. And it's surprising how many things actually, there's a lot of seeds in some packets. It's like, but I don't need that many. And some last longer. So I've got a chart here that that I put together. And for the seeds that will last 1 year are leeks, onions, parsnip, and sweet corn. 2 years, okra and parsley. 3 years, beans, carrots, and peas. So, if I've planted some peas this year and I didn't use all of them, if I save them, keep them dry in the dark usually, then I can plant them from the same seed packet the following year.
Will you get the same germination on those? Or sometimes I've heard that, the older the seed is, you might not get as many that will germinate.
Right. Well, there's a good way to test that, and that is take a paper towel and put on like 10 seeds of whatever it is, and moisten the towel and just let it sit there. And then once they start to germinate, you'll know the percentage. Out of 10, did 3 seeds germinate? Is that worth taking? Yes, but is 70% germinated? Then I would say they're still good. Right. So it's more of a, because who knows how they've been kept or what. But what surprises me is beets, mustard, pepper, pumpkin, and tomato all last 4 years.
That's a long time.
And that is a long time. So you don't have to spend quite as much money. Get maybe a different variety so that you're still having fun looking at that rack of seeds. And then cabbage, celery, cucumber, eggplant, lettuce, melons, radish, rutabaga, spinach, and squash will last up to 5 years. Wow.
I knew that tomatoes lasted that long because when they rot in my garden, I have volunteers for like multiple years.
Exactly.
I mean, even if we rotate the tomatoes out of that bed, I'm going to have tomatoes in that bed for a couple more years as they.
So that brings up, it's kind of a good segue there, Jeff. So, a lot of us, we go to the store and, we buy a melon that we really like. Oh, this is a great melon. We're scooping out the seeds. Will the seeds inside of that, will that grow the same melon of what you're eating?
It depends. That melon probably, depending on where it was grown and what other crops are around it, it may cross with another melon, or a cucumber can cross with a zucchini, and it's a pollination issue when they're both growing that creates a new seed. But some seeds are, and they'll say it in your catalogs that they won't cross, but it's pretty rare that really, you get all sorts of weird things, but that's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's the whole benefit of seed saving is that you are going to get not exactly sometimes what you planted the year before. You're going to get a cross of whatever was in your garden at that time.
Right. If you've got several different kinds of green beans or peas or whatever, they don't cross with each other, but beans of different kinds, you may end up, maybe that's how that calico bean was created, is that a purple bean and a white bean crossed, and here you go.
Yeah. I had one of the best volunteer tomatoes. Then the ones I put in that I paid money for, the plant was okay, but the volunteer was the sweetest cherry tomato I ever had. So sometimes it's a lucky thing.
And it's available for sale.
No.
No.
Patent pending.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that you can't save money by saving your seeds or cultivating those volunteers. but you're not always going to get those new varieties that are out there that have been tested
Yeah.
and that kind of thing.
Right,
So,
Yeah.
true to what it is.
Yeah.
So, when we're getting our seed packets, we're going home and, some of them are saying, okay, you can sow them outside now, some you need to start ahead of time. I know we've done segments in the past on Garden Time on seed starting, but, what's a quick kind of a rundown for somebody that's sitting there, they have all these packets and they're like, now what do I do?
Well, the idea that we mentioned earlier is read the packet carefully, clearly, and write down, that's what I do anyway, write down on the outside of the packet what temperature they germinate at and how long it takes from seeding to crop. And, or even like in basil, how long does it take to get there? I don't seed basil anymore, and I know a lot of people still do. It's just so much easier to buy a pot of basil than it is. But if you're into pesto and wanted to do a lot more, then that's a good thing to do.
What kind of materials are best if we're going to like seeding indoors?
Got it.
Do we need you see all sorts of special trays and pots and
Well, there's all sorts of as long as it's a container and it drains and your potting soil or seed starting soil is good, that you can do that. You can use the clamshells that you can get that are leftover food trays or for to-go food. As long as you make sure that you've poked some holes in the bottom that it'll drain, you can put that lid down and it creates its own little greenhouse. We had a discussion a little earlier about using egg cartons and whether or not that's a good thing to do or not. It seems like it used to be, but there's been some information that says they don't germinate very well.
Yeah,
in egg
some way
cartons.
the paper's treated or
Right.
something. Yeah.
So I don't have any one-on-one. I used to work with Peter Chan, who had the most amazing vegetable garden in the whole world, and he started everything early. And he used to roll soil in newspaper and put one pea seed in it, and he would end up with his peas started earlier than you would expect. So there's a lot of inventive ways to use things and not necessarily have to buy a big specialized tray.
because there's a lot of special pots
sure,
and little
surely.
peat-based
the
pots that you can go plant directly
Yeah.
into the garden. But there's a lot of things that
Yeah.
you can just use in your everyday recycle bin.
Sure.
That you can do that.
But I like the little pellets, the peat pellets that you throw in the water and stick one or two
Those are
seeds
fun,
in.
yeah.
I have pretty good success with that. And they're not expensive. You can buy a bag of 100 for not a lot.
And you talked about or mentioned soil, a seed starting soil. That's a pretty important step to remember. No matter
Extremely.
what you're planting it in,
Yeah.
the soil is key.
Right. Do not use outdoor soil to start seeds in. There's too many microorganisms and other things that will attack your seeds, or they'll rot or whatever. So, and the soils we have here in the Willamette Valley are clay, and that holds a lot of water. And so you're using that kind of soil from outside, your seeds will rot. They just will.
And there's
So seed starting mix is, you got to start there.
And there's a term dampening off.
Right.
And that's where it rots at the soil
Right
level.
at the level, yeah.
And you'll
Boink.
see these beautiful seedlings,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they just
Yeah,
drop over.
yeah.
And that's a function of moisture, isn't it? And fungus, isn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
But speaking of moisture, tell us about what do seeds require? Because they're seeds, they're not plants, but you still have to water them somehow.
Well, there again, it's your seed packet, and it shows you at what depth to plant them. Like a lettuce seed, you barely cover them at all. And other seeds, like a pea seed, needs to be an inch or so down before it's to give it room to grow those roots first before it pops out of the ground. So there's a lot of different things that you can learn, as we've said, with the packet itself as to how deep to plant it. And the finer you have the soil, unless it's a huge seed like a sunflower or a pea, The finer you have the soil, the better your germination will be.
Oh, nice. And then should we water them in and then, or mist them, and we keep up with that until you see the germination, and then you
Yeah,
just have to watch that
keeping
level.
them damp, not watered per se. I mean, you're not going to slop them out of
Right,
the tray.
the hose
but-
and- A mister is a great
like,
idea.
yeah, a mister or a little spray bottle
Yeah,
or something like
yeah,
that. To,
Yeah,
so you're
just
not
to dampen
overwatering.
unless it's a large seed, which
Mm-hmm.
you don't usually, the larger ones like squash and you usually just plant those outside anyway, so.
Right, you don't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah,
And we
yeah,
talk about when seedlings start about primary leaves and secondary leaves. And the primary leaves come out, a lot of times they look a little different. Those are the very first leaves that come out. You don't want to transplant.
no, you
until-
want to, the seed leaves will come up first, and then that first batch of true leaves will come, and after that is when you can transplant into something either slightly different than what you have it in, or if it's warm enough, maybe it can go outside. It usually, if you let them get a little hardier, they'll transplant better.
What do you, I know a lot of people, they buy heat mats, and then, we were talking about light and heat and all that. Do you really need that stuff?
I do.
I know. We have it. And it does help.
help,
It,
yeah.
it
It
promotes
does.
root growth.
It really
Yeah.
does help, especially I use them in the greenhouse, and when I do, it really helps to get that started. If it's not warm enough in the greenhouse, if I haven't heated it, then they won't start as easily. So the heat mats really help.
And then you
And
mentioned
lights.
lighting. So I mean,
Right.
there's tons of different lighting options now for grow lights. Is just good old Mother Nature daylight good, or is it?
It is if you really have it, but most
Right.
of our homes have light comes in a certain time of day, but
Right.
it's not constant.
Right. Or if
And-
like we are here in the Pacific Northwest, where we kind of
Yeah.
gray skies and
Right,
dreary for
right.
months on end, and we don't have
Right.
the.
So it just depends on how serious you get about wanting to
Right.
do it, and what you want to invest in it. So
Yeah.
you either, the bottom line is, okay, you can start things from seed, but you can just go to the garden center and buy whatever you want.
Let us do the work, right?
Yeah, because
Sure.
Because do you need, if you're planting tomatoes or whatever, do you need 100 of the same
Right.
variety of tomato all from the same pack, or do you just go
Right.
buy one or two of the varieties that you like?
That's true. And then one more thing so I have all these beautiful seedlings. I've potted them up into bigger pots. And so now it's time. My soil's warm. I can just go from my house into the garden, or should I harden them off somehow?
Which means acclimate them.
Or acclimate
Sure,
them, yeah.
sure.
It's that term.
Depends on what they are. Some of the more tender plants really it doesn't work very well to move it from a greenhouse or an indoor setting bang outside.
Right.
But most of them, if the plant is big enough and it's gotten enough true leaves, it should be fine.
Yeah.
And to take them straight out.
Okay.
And so, Jan, we were talking about, you're mentioning light, and as the days get longer, it's going to get more light. But it's not just light. I mean, people have to pay attention to like frost dates and soil temperatures. And we mentioned 45 to 50 degrees before you put stuff in the ground. Is that standard rule around the country kind of thing?
I would say, look, there's some local differences certainly in your own microclimate versus somebody else's. But at this time of year, there isn't really a generic thing you could say, if it's 50 degrees, you can do that. Because some seeds are more temperate than others. So there again, it's on the package as far as, and having that fairly inexpensive soil thermometer will keep you out of a lot of trouble.
And more success.
Right.
And we were talking about kids, getting
Yeah.
kids involved. Seeds are perfect.
Yeah. My grandkids didn't have a choice. They, from the time, they would have so much fun playing with the mud in the raised beds in the spring when I hadn't planted anything yet. And they helped Grandpa till and all those things. And it's important to give that background to kids that can feel the soil in their fingers, that can water something and watch it grow. The neighbor boys I usually have, and I think we taped it one time, they help me dig potatoes.
Yeah.
To me, I'm a kid, every time I dig potatoes. I came home from work once and Ray'd already dug the potatoes, and it was like, don't do that again. Because it's just so fun. And there's seeds like peas, sweet peas, big sunflowers, things that are easier for little kids to hold. And then it was mentioned earlier that maybe take a plastic cup and put your soil in there, your potting soil, and then the kids can literally watch the roots grow as they
Through that clear
mature.
plastic, yeah.
Yeah, and some people don't have gardens, so that would be
Yeah,
kind of fun.
sure.
You know, if you live in an apartment or, you know, you just don't have a garden to go to, that's kind of fun to do in the house too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we talked about bringing, even though it's cold out, there are things blooming or about to bloom, and we've talked about bringing that in, and that's on your list too. So talk about some of the things that people could do to bring some of that outdoor color in.
Well, you can always, we were talking earlier about floating hellebore blossoms. There's nothing prettier than a bowl of water and these different hellebores or other things. I float peonies. There's a lot of different things you can bring in. This time of year, forsythia you could bring in and force the blooms of, say, forsythia or like flowering plum or anything that's
quince,
Any flowering,
that
yeah.
it's going to bloom, and it'll bloom sooner if you bring it inside and it warms up. So it brings that color in the house and also invites you to get out there as soon as you possibly can
Yeah.
to get things going.
And we talked about planning, because that is, I almost notice it on every page of notes that you've given us. Planning, not just for the future, but, for the immediate future, but also for the long term.
This is a good time of year to go out and see how everything's doing. And maybe even take an inventory in the fall to see how stressed things were from the summer before. And just, what do I want to do differently this year? What didn't make it, never will make it? I keep babying it and it's still not going to make it. And so what kind of things can you do? Well, I know we mentioned one other time where I used to do a lot of landscape designs, and I would have people go in the house and say, okay, in the winter, when you're not outside, where do you see your landscape? And have somebody go out there with a shovel or something and, move yourself around and
right.
decide what you can see from your kitchen window or your living room window, whatever. And then decide what you want to put there, and you'll see it. It's like I have a Sasanqua winter blooming camellia that's right at the driveway. So, and if it were somewhere else in the yard, I wouldn't probably ever notice when it's blooming. And so put things where you want to see them if they're winter blooming or very early spring blooming plants.
And we've talked about that fragrance.
And
We
fragrant,
did
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
Fragrant,
the
yeah.
sarcoccas and the daphnes,
Right
and putting
there.
them by
Yeah.
Yeah.
your walkway or a
Absolutely.
doorway. Or
Absolutely. So that there's all sorts of things you can do.
So we can do a lot of planting now. What about dividing and transplanting? Things that we saw in our yard, and we took notes from last
Yeah.
year that it didn't quite work here. I need to move it. Is now that time to do it, or when is a better time?
Depending on what it is, I suppose. But if it's a pretty established plant that's not too big to move, it's a good time to do some transplanting. Now, of ornamentals, I'm not saying the tenderest things, but perennials and evergreens and things like that you can certainly do now.
Right, because you're ready. They're not
Right,
quite popping,
right.
doing any growth
Right.
that you're going to disturb
Right.
now, but they're just right on the brink of
Yeah.
going to
sure.
start growing some new roots and flourishing. So
One of the first things I'm going to do this year when I end up getting out there to do more is prune my buddleia back. I didn't realize because I never had it before the last year or so. It blooms again like blueberries do on new wood, so I need to prune it down way lower so that the blooms are going to be not smaller, but shorter,
Right.
where I can see them better. And another plant right now that I'm loving, always do this time of year, is Mahonia lamarifolia that's blooming yellow.
Right.
The bees were on it the other day.
Whoa.
A little early, but they must know.
Confused too.
there. Yeah.
The hummingbirds have been feeding off the flowers. Even some of the songbirds will eat some of the spent flowers.
Aw.
And then later they'll eat berries too. So if that's something you want to do something, think about where you're putting it so that when in the wintertime you're inside
Right.
or in the early spring, you can still see it.
Because it's easy to kind of forget about your yard.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
You know, in the winter months and when it's
Sure.
dark and but it's now there's so much stuff that's just on that verge of starting to wake up or the earlier bloomings that if you start paying attention to what's in your yard or wanting color now, go walk around a neighborhood or go to your local garden center and see what's in because there's a surprising number of plants that you don't see in those other months that you're typically in the garden center that
Exactly.
May through
Right.
Exactly.
time frame that you're kind of missing out on.
Yeah.
And now's the time to go,
Yeah,
go find
for
this.
sure.
And we
For
were
sure.
talking too about, you said you have to uncover your pots, but this is the time too to refresh those pots. Maybe you had that ornamental kale and cabbage from winter time or the pansies, and so maybe get some fresh ones in because
Sure.
you want that close-up color that you notice right outside your door or on your front porch.
Sure.
So that, it just looks beautiful and it's ready to go, and maybe you don't want to go out into the mud or muck, but you
No.
can still kind of
Bring
get that
things-
itch
Bring
satisfied.
things in.
And while the soil is still is wet
Yeah.
and pliable, it's a lot of times it's easier to do stuff like that, dividing your hostas, your epimediums, that kind of stuff, because you can actually get down there, get down and dirty and dig that stuff up. So, Jan, thank you so much
been
once
fun.
again. An hour doesn't seem enough. We only made it through 2 months, but we hope this gives you some ideas about what to do in your late winter, early spring garden. We'll have Jan back again at another time, but go to your local independent garden center, check with your local extension service. There are things that you could be doing year round, but really in the spring, we're all kind of itching to exercise our green thumbs, and there's no reason why you can't. So we hope you enjoyed this one. Always go to the gardentime.tv website. We thank Capital Subaru, Al's Garden Center, Portland Nursery, Graham Watering Tools. They're all coming on board to help support the podcast, and I'm sure they would appreciate it if you go and visit them as well. So thank you, Jan, and
Welcome.
happy gardening.
Here at Capital Subaru, we are family. From you, our customers, our coworkers, and even our actual family members work here. This is my son, Casey. We're generations ahead of the competition, and we're always working to keep you and your family moving.
We're here for you. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
All the support you need, from sales and financing to service and parts. We'll be here for you for generations to come.
And generations after that.
I'm Blake,
And I'm Casey. We make it easy to join our Capital Subaru family.
where it's
Your way on the Parkway.